The year was 1920, and Berlin was a city teetering between ruin and reinvention. The scars of the Great War were still fresh, etched into the cobblestone streets, the bombed-out buildings, and the collective psyche of its inhabitants. Yet, amidst the chaos and political unrest, Berlin pulsed with a unique energy, a mixture of desperation, ambition, and curiosity. It was a city where innovation and madness often walk hand in hand, and where the boundaries of science were being tested in ways that would shock even the most daring minds of the time. It was in this volatile environment that a surgeon emerged, a man whose fascination with the human mind would lead him down paths most would consider unthinkable. Unlike the celebrated pioneers of medicine, who sought cures for disease or relief for suffering, this surgeon had a singular obsession: memory itself. He wanted to understand not just how the human brain remembered, but whether memory could be manipulated, altered, or even recreated entirely. His experiments were not conducted in the sanitized halls of a modern research facility. They took place in shadowed operating rooms, under the veil of secrecy, on subjects who were often unable to consent in any meaningful way. From the very beginning, his work raised questions that unsettled even his closest colleagues. How far could science go before it crossed into something darker, something morally ambiguous? Was memory simply a collection of electrical signals and chemical reactions, or was it an essence of identity, something sacred that defined who a person truly was? These questions were not merely theoretical for the surgeon. They were challenges, puzzles to be solved at any cost. The city around him mirrored the tension of his experiments. Berlin in the early 1920s was a place where avant-garde art collided with political upheaval, where jazz clubs hummed through the night while the streets outside were roamed by gangs and ex-soldiers struggling to reintegrate into society. The scientific community thrived in this environment, pushing boundaries in neurology, psychiatry, and experimental surgery, yet there was always an unspoken line, a moral threshold that most dared not cross. The surgeon, however, did not see limits. He saw opportunities, experiments waiting to be conducted, minds waiting to be explored. To the public, he was a figure shrouded in mystery. Few knew the full extent of his work, and even fewer understood its implications. Rumors circulated through Berlin's intellectual circles and medical forums, patients who returned from his operating rooms with fragments of lost memories, identities that seemed shifted, or in some cases, entirely erased. These stories created a mixture of fear and fascination, drawing attention from journalists, academics, and those who were eager to understand the limits of the human mind. What made his story even more compelling was the intersection of science and obsession. Here was a man who combined surgical precision with a relentless curiosity for the unknown. Every procedure, every experiment, was not just an attempt to expand scientific knowledge. It was a venture into uncharted territory, a challenge to the natural order itself. And yet, even in the shadow of such ambition, there was an underlying question that would haunt the surgeon and his subjects alike. At what cost does mastery over memory come, and who ultimately pays the price? In this documentary, we will explore the life and work of this enigmatic surgeon, tracing the origins of his obsession, the methods he employed, and the extraordinary consequences of his experiments. We will delve into the cultural and scientific landscape of 1920s Berlin, uncovering why this city became a crucible for such radical experimentation. Through historical records, case studies, and newly discovered documents, we will examine how one man's pursuit of knowledge blurred the lines between genius and madness, science and horror. By the end, viewers will be left with an unsettling understanding. Memory is not just a biological function, it is the essence of identity, a fragile construct that can be manipulated, altered, or destroyed. And in the hands of a man willing to defy both ethics and human decency, that power becomes something both fascinating and terrifying. This is a story that will challenge our understanding of consciousness, morality, and the limits of scientific ambition. The stage is set. Berlin is alive with possibility and danger. A surgeon prepares to probe the depths of the human mind, and history is about to bear witness to experiments that will haunt both the scientific community and the very notion of memory itself. Berlin in the early 1920s was a city of contradictions, a place where innovation and chaos coexisted in uneasy balance. The First World War had left the city scarred, its economy crippled, its citizens traumatized, and its streets littered with both the physical and emotional remnants of conflict. Yet, amid the rubble, a certain vibrancy persisted. Berlin became a magnet for artists, thinkers, and scientists alike, all drawn to its reputation as a hub of radical ideas and experimentation. Cafes buzzed with intellectual debate, theaters showcased avant-garde performances, and laboratories pushed the boundaries of what was medically and scientifically possible. The city was also a microcosm of tension. Political factions vied for power, from socialist uprisings to right-wing paramilitary groups, creating an atmosphere of unrest that simmered beneath the surface of everyday life. Violence was never far away, clashes in the streets were common, and the threat of civil instability hung like a shadow over the city's otherwise vibrant cultural scene. In this climate, the pursuit of knowledge and progress was both a refuge and a risk. Scientists operated under immense pressure to achieve results, sometimes ignoring ethical constraints in their hunger for discovery. Amid this turbulence, medicine in Berlin was entering a period of remarkable transformation. Neurology and psychiatry were rapidly evolving, with researchers exploring the mind in ways previously considered taboo. The concept of the unconscious, the manipulation of memory, and the treatment of mental disorders were no longer relegated to philosophical speculation. They were becoming tangible fields of study. Hospitals and private clinics began experimenting with surgical techniques, chemical treatments, and psychological therapies, each aiming to uncover the hidden mechanisms of human thought and behavior. The city itself seemed to encourage bold experimentation. There was a pervasive sense that the boundaries of the possible could be expanded, if only one was daring enough to try. Yet for every breakthrough, there were failures and disasters. Human experimentation in this era existed in a grey area, often conducted without full consent, frequently with disastrous consequences. Berlin's medical community was divided. Some researchers embraced the chance to explore uncharted territory, while others voiced deep concern over the ethical implications. It was a city where curiosity frequently outpaced caution, and where the line between genius and madness was perilously thin. The cultural landscape also influenced the direction of scientific inquiry. Berlin was a city obsessed with the human mind, its mysteries, and its vulnerabilities. Philosophers debated the nature of identity, psychologists theorized about memory and perception, and artists attempted to depict the intangible workings of thought through abstract and provocative works. This intellectual ferment created fertile ground for a surgeon whose ambitions reached far beyond conventional medicine. The city, in a sense, incubated his obsession, providing both inspiration and opportunity for the radical experiments that would define his career. At the same time, Berlin's social fabric was in flux. Traditional values were being challenged by a wave of modernity, and the trauma of war had left citizens searching for meaning and control in their lives. People were fascinated by the mind's potential, its capacity for memory, imagination, and transformation. This fascination made them both eager participants and unwitting subjects in the burgeoning field of experimental psychology and neurology. The surgeon capitalized on this climate, blending scientific rigor with persuasive charisma to recruit subjects who would endure procedures that many would later describe as both horrifying and transformative. Understanding Berlin's unique environment is crucial to understanding the surgeon's story. Without the city's volatile mixture of cultural openness, scientific ambition, and moral ambiguity, his experiments might never have occurred, or at least never reach the scale and notoriety that history remembers. Berlin provided the stage, a city both modern and chaotic, progressive yet morally conflicted, where the pursuit of knowledge could flourish alongside the shadows of human cost. In this section, we begin to see how environment shapes ambition. The surgeon did not operate in a vacuum. He thrived because Berlin offered him the tools, the intellectual climate, and the social tolerance to push the boundaries of medical science. But the same city that nurtured innovation also served as a warning. In a place so unbalanced, the consequences of unchecked curiosity could be devastating. As we move forward, the focus will narrow from the city itself to the man who dared to manipulate the very essence of human identity. Understanding the cultural and scientific landscape of Berlin helps us grasp why he acted as he did, and why the world would remember him not merely as a surgeon, but as a figure who blurred the lines between discovery and danger, curiosity and cruelty. Amid the chaos and creativity of 1920s Berlin, a surgeon quietly began to distinguish himself from his peers. He was not celebrated for conventional achievements. There were no groundbreaking surgical techniques in the public eye, no medals or honors that would place him in the annals of mainstream medicine. Instead, his fascination lay deeper, darker, and far more unsettling: the human mind itself, and the memories that formed the foundation of identity. From the earliest accounts, it was clear that this man saw memory not merely as a biological process, but as a malleable landscape, one that could be explored, altered, and perhaps even controlled. Born in the final years of the 19th century, the surgeon's early life was marked by a mixture of privilege and rigidity. Stories suggest a childhood steeped in discipline, a fascination with anatomy and the workings of the human body, and an insatiable curiosity that could not be satisfied by textbooks alone. From an early age, he showed signs of intellectual obsession, a tendency to probe questions that others found unsettling or irrelevant. Where most children were content with simple answers, he lingered on the mechanics of thought, the fragility of memory, and the way experiences shape the self. Teachers and mentors noted both brilliance and an intensity that bordered on the obsessive. Medical school only amplified these tendencies. As a young student, he excelled in surgical technique, demonstrating precision and confidence beyond his years. But it was his interest in the brain that truly set him apart. While most of his contemporaries were content to follow established neurological theories, he sought to question them, to push the boundaries of what science could explain. He immersed himself in the work of pioneers like Sigmund Freud, Emil Kraepelin, and other early neurologists, but he did not stop at theory. He wanted practical, tangible results. He wanted to intervene directly in the mind, to see how memory could be shaped, enhanced, or erased. Colleagues later describe him as charismatic but unsettling. He was capable of great charm, able to persuade others to support his experiments or provide access to resources, yet there was an undercurrent of ruthlessness. He seemed untroubled by conventional ethical concerns, focused solely on the pursuit of knowledge and the testing of his ideas. Some suggested that this detachment was necessary for the work he envisioned. Others whispered that it was the first sign of moral compromise, a willingness to cross lines that others would not dare approach. By the time he had completed his formal training, the surgeon had already begun experimenting in small ways, exploring the relationship between trauma, memory, and identity. Early cases involved patients who had suffered brain injuries, mental illness, or extreme emotional distress. He observed how memories could be distorted, lost, or resurfaced unpredictably, and he began to speculate about the possibility of deliberately influencing these processes. It was a radical and frightening notion, one that blurred the line between healing and control. His methods were as unconventional as his ideas. He combined surgical intervention with emerging psychological techniques, sometimes administering chemicals to alter cognition or performing procedures designed to target specific regions of the brain thought to store memory. The results were inconsistent and often horrifying. Some patients reportedly regained lost memories or experienced vivid recollections of events long forgotten, while others descended into confusion, identity fragmentation, or psychological collapse. Yet each failure seemed only to fuel his obsession, driving him to refine his techniques, to push further, and to disregard warnings from colleagues and authorities alike. What made him particularly dangerous and fascinating was his ability to cloak his experiments in legitimacy. To the public and to many within the medical community, he appeared to be a dedicated physician, exploring uncharted territory in the service of science. To those closest to his work, however, the reality was far more sinister. There were whispers of subjects who were unwilling or unable to consent, of procedures conducted behind closed doors, and of the psychological toll that these experiments exacted. Even as he gained notoriety within certain academic circles, he remained largely enigmatic, a figure who inspired both admiration and fear. By 1920, the surgeon was poised at the center of Berlin's experimental scene. He had the skills, the ambition, and the environment to undertake research that no other contemporary doctor would dare attempt. Yet, with each procedure, he edged closer to moral and ethical collapse. The city that nurtured his curiosity also became a witness to the consequences of his obsession, a city of intrigue, scandal, and shadowed corridors where memory itself became a subject of experimentation. In understanding this man, we begin to see the central tension of the story, a brilliant surgeon with the power to manipulate one of the most intimate aspects of human life, operating in a world that encouraged both audacity and secrecy. His obsession with memory was not just scientific, it was personal, philosophical, and, ultimately, dangerous. It would set the stage for experiments that challenged the limits of medical science, tested the resilience of the human mind, and left a legacy both haunting and morally ambiguous. As the story unfolds, we will follow the surgeon deeper into his work, exploring the methods he devised, the patients who became both subjects and victims, and the ethical quagmire that his ambition created. The emergence of this figure in Berlin is not just the beginning of a tale of scientific curiosity. It is the opening chapter of a story where obsession, innovation, and the darkest aspects of human nature collide. The surgeon's fascination with memory did not remain theoretical for long. By the early 1920s, he had begun conducting experiments that blurred the line between observation and intervention, testing the very limits of what the human brain could endure. These early attempts were as rudimentary as they were audacious, often relying on a combination of surgical procedures, chemical stimulation, and intense psychological observation. In a time before modern neuroimaging or ethical oversight, his operating room became a stage for experiments that were both pioneering and terrifying. His initial subjects were often patients who had already experienced some form of neurological trauma, soldiers returning from the Great War with head injuries, civilians who had suffered accidents, or individuals grappling with severe mental illness. The logic was chillingly simple. These brains were already altered, partially broken, and therefore, in his mind, suitable for experimentation. He observed how memory could fragment, resurface, or vanish entirely, and from these patterns, he began to formulate methods for intentionally influencing recollection. One technique involved careful surgical intervention in regions of the brain thought to be responsible for memory storage and recall. Operating with precision that few contemporaries could match, he would attempt to stimulate or disrupt specific neural pathways. The results were unpredictable. Some patients experienced sudden clarity, recalling details of events long buried, while others descended into confusion, losing fragments of their identity or slipping into amnesia that could last days or longer. Each outcome, whether success or failure, added to the surgeon's growing obsession. Chemical experimentation also became a critical component of his early work. Substances that affected cognition, mood, or perception were administered in controlled doses, though control was often more aspirational than real. The chemicals sometimes triggered temporary recollection or heightened awareness, but just as often, they produced severe disorientation, hallucinations, or lasting neurological damage. In many ways, these early trials were a form of trial and error on human consciousness itself, a macabre dance between discovery and destruction. Psychology, too, played a central role. The surgeon meticulously recorded patient responses, noting patterns in behavior, speech, and emotional reaction. He developed exercises designed to probe memory, asking patients to recall long-forgotten childhood events, to reconstruct dreams, or to relive traumatic experiences under observation. These sessions could be grueling, pushing the mind to its limits and sometimes beyond. Patients reported vivid flashes of memory, inexplicable associations, or moments of terrifying clarity, and in some cases, they refused to continue, unable to cope with the psychological strain. Despite the risks, the surgeon persisted. Each partial success fueled his belief that memory was not merely a passive record of experience, but a malleable construct capable of manipulation, enhancement, or erasure. He began to theorize that identity itself could be influenced through memory. If one could alter what a person remembered, one could, in effect, alter who they were. This idea, radical for the time, would later define the core of his work and spark the ethical debates that would haunt him and the medical community. Colleagues were intrigued and disturbed in equal measure. Some admired his daring, viewing his experiments as a necessary push into uncharted territory. Others were alarmed, warning that the surgeon was treading dangerously close to the edge of moral and professional boundaries. Rumors began circulating within Berlin's medical circles, whispered accounts of patients who had emerged from the operating room unrecognizable to their families, or who displayed strange behaviors that suggested their memories had been altered or overwritten. These stories heightened both fascination and fear, positioning the surgeon as a figure of intrigue, genius, and horror. Even at this early stage, his work demonstrated a dangerous duality: the potential for groundbreaking insight into the human mind, and the capacity to inflict profound harm. The very methods he pioneered, the combination of surgery, chemistry, and psychological intervention, would later influence fields ranging from experimental neurology to cognitive therapy, but in his hands, they were instruments of obsession rather than purely tools of science. The line between innovation and cruelty was perilously thin, and the consequences were both immediate and enduring for his subjects. It was during this period that the surgeon began to envision larger, more ambitious projects. The early experiments were the foundation, a testing ground for techniques and hypotheses that would later escalate in scope and audacity. Each patient became a puzzle, each success and failure a piece of a larger vision, the ability to unlock, manipulate, and perhaps even control memory itself. The ethical questions were already mounting, yet he appeared indifferent, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a belief that the pursuit of knowledge justified any cost. By the end of these formative years, the surgeon had established a reputation that was both admired and feared. His early experiments laid the groundwork for a series of interventions that would challenge the very essence of identity, ethics, and human memory. It was clear that what began as careful observation had transformed into something far more ambitious, something that would leave a mark not only on his patients but on the history of science itself. Berlin had provided the stage, and the surgeon was ready to push the boundaries of human consciousness to their darkest extremes. As the surgeon's experiments progressed, the moral questions surrounding his work became impossible to ignore. In the early days, his manipulations of memory might have been dismissed as eccentric, even visionary. But as the procedures grew more invasive and the psychological consequences more severe, colleagues, patients, and the public began to recognize a disturbing pattern. Knowledge was being pursued at the expense of human dignity. What was science, and what was exploitation? The line was becoming impossibly blurred. The ethical dilemma was amplified by the very nature of memory itself. Memory is not merely a record of events. It forms the foundation of identity. Altering it is not akin to performing a standard medical procedure. It is an intrusion into the essence of a person, a reconfiguration of who they are at the most fundamental level. The surgeon, fully aware of this, seemed undeterred. For him, the pursuit of discovery justified the risks. But for society, these risks raised profound questions. Were the subjects truly consenting if they did not fully understand the potential consequences? Could a society tolerate experiments that tampered with identity in the name of science? Medical colleagues were sharply divided. Some defended his work, arguing that radical experimentation was necessary to push the boundaries of neurological science. They saw a genius at work, someone capable of glimpsing truths about the human mind that no one else could. Others, however, were alarmed. Professional journals quietly debated whether the surgeon's methods constituted abuse, pointing to the long-term psychological trauma suffered by patients. Rumors circulated of individuals whose memories had been partially erased or permanently altered, leaving them unrecognizable even to their families. These accounts fueled a growing unease. Here was a man whose brilliance was inseparable from moral ambiguity, whose curiosity was both admirable and terrifying. Newspapers and public discourse also reflected this tension. In an era when the horrors of war were fresh in collective memory, Berliners were sensitive to the ethics of experimentation on vulnerable individuals. Letters to the editor, academic critiques, and whispered warnings all suggested that the surgeon's work was teetering on the edge of scandal. Yet, fascination often outweighed condemnation. The idea that a human mind could be manipulated, memories extracted or rewritten, captured the imagination of intellectuals, writers, and artists alike. Curiosity and fear coexisted, feeding the surgeon's notoriety and creating an aura of both genius and menace. The ethical stakes were further complicated by the lack of regulatory oversight. Unlike modern research institutions, there were few formal rules governing consent, mental health interventions, or experimental surgery. This vacuum allowed the surgeon to operate with remarkable freedom, but it also magnified the moral consequences. Decisions that today would require ethics committees and informed consent were then left to individual judgment, and in his case, judgment was often subordinated to obsession. In many ways, the very environment that enabled his experimentation also amplified the moral peril. Psychologists and philosophers of the time began to voice concern. Some argued that tampering with memory was tantamount to playing God, that the integrity of the human mind should remain inviolable. Others suggested that such interventions could have unforeseen societal consequences. If memory could be altered in a single individual, could it not be used for manipulation, control, or even coercion? The surgeon's work was no longer a matter of personal ambition. It had become a question of ethics that extended far beyond the operating room. Even within his own laboratory, the tension was palpable. Assistants and junior doctors reported unease at the increasing severity of procedures, at the emotional collapse of subjects, and at the secrecy surrounding the experiments. Some resigned in protest, unwilling to participate in what they saw as morally indefensible work. Others stayed, driven by loyalty, fear, or fascination. This internal division mirrored the wider debate, highlighting how the surgeon's pursuit of knowledge had become inseparable from controversy. Despite these warnings, the surgeon pressed on. The ethical dilemmas that plagued his colleagues seemed only to energize him, reinforcing his belief that discovery required sacrifice. He rationalized that the human mind, so central to identity and experience, was precisely the frontier that demanded bold exploration. Yet this rationalization, however compelling to him, came at an enormous cost: the psychological well-being of his subjects, the trust of the scientific community, and the moral compass of a city struggling to rebuild in the shadow of war. In examining the ethical dilemmas of the surgeon's work, we confront one of the central tensions of the story: the collision of curiosity and conscience. His experiments force us to ask uncomfortable questions about the price of knowledge, the limits of human ambition, and the fragility of morality when confronted with scientific possibility. Berlin's laboratories became more than a place of learning. They became a testing ground for the boundaries of ethics itself, where the pursuit of memory and identity pushed humanity into morally ambiguous territory. As we move into the next section, we will meet the human subjects at the center of these experiments, patients whose lives were forever altered by procedures that tested not only their minds but also the limits of morality. Through their stories, we will begin to understand the tangible consequences of tampering with memory and the chilling reality of the surgeon's obsession. The true impact of the surgeon's work becomes most tangible when we examine the individuals who found themselves at the center of his experiments. These were not faceless statistics or theoretical models. They were men and women whose identities, memories, and very sense of self were placed under the surgeon's relentless scrutiny. Each case provides a window into both the audacity of his ambition and the human cost of tampering with memory, revealing consequences that were as unpredictable as they were unsettling. One of his earliest subjects was a young war veteran who had suffered a traumatic head injury on the front lines. The soldier's memory was fragmented, leaving him unable to recall significant portions of his past, including the experiences that had shaped him into the man he had become. To the surgeon, this presented an opportunity. If memory could be restored or reconstructed, the implications for science, and perhaps for identity itself, were enormous. The procedure involved careful surgical stimulation of areas of the brain believed to store memory traces, combined with intense psychological exercises designed to provoke recollection. Initially, results were promising. The veteran experienced flashes of lost experiences, vivid recollections of childhood, and even details from the battlefield that had eluded him for years. But these successes were fleeting and precarious. As the weeks passed, the patient began to display signs of confusion and disorientation. Memories overlapped, blurred, and at times seemed to conflict with one another, leaving him unable to distinguish between past and present. His personality appeared to fragment, shifting unpredictably depending on which recollection dominated his consciousness. In some instances, he became entirely unrecognizable to his family, demonstrating the dark truth underlying the surgeon's work. Memory is not simply a record to be accessed or repaired, it is the core of who we are, and tampering with it carries profound consequences. Another subject, a middle-aged woman struggling with early-onset dementia, presented a different set of challenges. The surgeon was intrigued by the possibility of temporarily restoring lost memories, hoping to reverse or slow the progression of cognitive decline. He employed a combination of chemical stimulation and structured memory exercises, pushing the woman to recall details of her past life, from her childhood home to long-forgotten relationships. The sessions were intense, sometimes lasting for hours, and the emotional toll was severe. She experienced moments of clarity so vivid that she relived past joys and traumas as if they were happening in real time, followed by crashes into confusion, fear, and despair. While the surgeon documented what he considered successes, the woman's family witnessed a transformation that was both remarkable and deeply unsettling. Their loved one could remember the past but was increasingly unstable in the present. Perhaps most haunting were the cases in which memory appeared to be altered beyond recovery. One patient, a man with no apparent neurological damage, was subjected to experimental procedures intended to probe the limits of memory manipulation. The surgeon aimed to test whether certain memories could be suppressed, erased, or even rewritten. The results were catastrophic. The man lost entire segments of his personal history, relationships, significant life events, and formative experiences that had shaped his personality. In their place arose confusion, emotional instability, and a sense of alienation from his own identity. Family members later describe him as a stranger, a living testament to the dangers inherent in the surgeon's work. These cases sparked whispers in the medical community, suggesting that the pursuit of knowledge had begun to overstep the boundaries of humanity. Yet even as the consequences grew more severe, the surgeon pressed on. For him, each subject was both a puzzle and a proving ground, an opportunity to refine techniques and push the limits of what memory could endure. He meticulously recorded behaviors, responses, and emotional reactions, treating each outcome as data to be analyzed. While some subjects experienced brief restorations of lost memories or glimpses of forgotten moments, others suffered long-term psychological trauma, a price often dismissed in the name of scientific progress. This duality, success intertwined with suffering, would come to define the ethical and moral controversy surrounding his work. The human cost extended beyond individual cases. Families struggled to cope with loved ones who returned from the surgeon's care altered, sometimes irreparably. Relationships strained under the weight of identity shifts, emotional instability, and memory loss. Communities began to whisper about the mysterious mind surgeon who could reshape a person from within, leaving some fearful, others fascinated, and many unsure of what to believe. The surgeon's work, once confined to the operating room, began to ripple outward, affecting social dynamics, public perception, and the broader discourse on medical ethics. Interestingly, not all outcomes were negative. In some instances, the surgeon's interventions did produce positive results. Patients with traumatic amnesia regained access to critical memories, veterans recalled lost experiences, and those suffering from psychological trauma occasionally found relief through the structured recall exercises. These successes lent credibility to the surgeon's work, allowing him to justify further experimentation, even as the darker consequences continued to mount. The paradox of his legacy is striking. He was simultaneously healer and disruptor, innovator and manipulator, savior and destroyer of the very memories that defined his patients' identities. Through these case studies, a pattern emerges, a chilling demonstration of the fragility of memory and the profound responsibility inherent in manipulating it. The surgeon's work offers a lens through which we can explore the intersection of science, ambition, and morality, revealing not only the possibilities of human cognition but also the terrifying vulnerabilities that come with it. Each patient was a testament to both the brilliance and the danger of his experiments, a living record of the consequences that arise when curiosity eclipses caution. As we move forward, the focus will shift to the scientific principles underpinning his experiments, exploring how neurological and psychological theories of memory informed his methods. Understanding the science behind the work is essential not only to appreciate the ambition of the surgeon but also to grasp why his experiments produced such extraordinary, and often devastating, results. These insights will illuminate both the potential and the peril of tampering with the most intimate recesses of the human mind. To understand the surgeon's work, it is essential to delve into the scientific landscape of memory as it existed in the early 20th century. At the time, neurology and psychology were fields still in their infancy, a frontier filled with unanswered questions and experimental theories. Memory was seen not merely as a biological function but as a key to understanding consciousness itself, a fragile, malleable construct that could hold the essence of identity. The surgeon's ambition was to probe this mystery, to manipulate memory directly, and in doing so, he ventured into territory that modern science still approaches with caution. Early neurological studies suggested that memory was localized in specific regions of the brain, particularly the cerebral cortex and structures such as the hippocampus. These findings, though rudimentary by today's standards, provided the foundation for the surgeon's approach. He theorized that by targeting these areas, it might be possible to extract or restore specific memories, essentially mapping the mind in a way that had never been attempted before. This was radical thinking for the time, bordering on audacity, yet it aligned with the experimental spirit of Berlin's scientific community. Psychological theories also played a crucial role. Freud's exploration of the unconscious had already introduced the idea that past experiences, particularly traumatic ones, could be buried deep within the mind yet continue to influence behavior. Meanwhile, other early psychologists were investigating memory as a reconstructive process, not merely a static record. These ideas suggested that memory could be altered, reshaped, or even suppressed, concepts that fascinated the surgeon and gave intellectual justification for his experiments. By blending neurological and psychological insights, he sought to create a methodology capable of probing and manipulating the human mind at an unprecedented level. In practice, the surgeon's techniques were both innovative and perilous. Surgical interventions were aimed at regions believed to store memory traces, often involving precise stimulation, removal, or alteration of neural tissue. At the same time, chemical agents were administered to heighten brain activity or facilitate recall, introducing another layer of unpredictability. Psychological exercises, including guided recall and repetitive memory drills, were layered on top of these interventions, producing results that were inconsistent, sometimes illuminating, and often horrifying. The combination of biology, chemistry, and psychology represented a bold attempt to control a process that was, by its very nature, chaotic and deeply personal. The surgeon's understanding of memory was grounded in the belief that it could be segmented and manipulated almost like a machine. Each recollection, each fragment of experience, could theoretically be isolated, strengthened, or suppressed. This mechanistic view of memory was aligned with the prevailing scientific optimism of the era, a belief that all aspects of human life, even thought and identity, could be studied, measured, and controlled. Yet the human mind proved far less predictable than theory suggested. Memories were not discrete units but interconnected webs, tied to emotion, perception, and personality in ways that the surgeon could not always anticipate. This unpredictability was both a source of frustration and fascination, driving him deeper into experimental methods. Contemporary observers of the surgeon's work often marveled at his ingenuity. He was attempting something no one else had dared, a systematic study of memory that combined surgical precision with psychological insight. The sheer ambition of the endeavor was awe-inspiring. Yet even admirers could not ignore the moral and human consequences. Subjects frequently exhibited unexpected responses, emotional instability, identity fragmentation, or profound confusion, demonstrating that memory is more than a functional storage system. It is an intricate web that underpins every aspect of human consciousness. Modern neuroscience provides additional context for the surgeon's work. Today, we understand that memory involves complex interactions between multiple brain regions, neurotransmitters, and neural networks. Memories are encoded, consolidated, and retrieved through processes that are influenced by emotion, context, and prior knowledge. In light of this understanding, the surgeon's early interventions can be seen as both pioneering and perilously crude. He was attempting to influence processes he only partially understood, using tools that were experimental and often dangerous. His successes, therefore, were remarkable not just for their results but for the audacity of the attempt. The scientific principles behind his experiments also shed light on why the consequences were so variable. A single surgical miscalculation, a slight chemical imbalance, or an emotional trigger could completely alter the outcome, producing recovery in one patient and irreversible trauma in another. Memory, it turns out, is not merely a physical entity but a dynamic and deeply personal phenomenon. The surgeon's work illuminated both the potential of scientific exploration and the peril inherent in manipulating the essence of identity. Ultimately, the science behind his experiments reveals a paradox. The same principles that offered a pathway to understanding and possibly enhancing memory also created the potential for devastation. The surgeon's methods were not merely mechanical, they were deeply entangled with the human experience, subject to variables that no formula could fully predict. This intersection of science and humanity is what makes his story so compelling and haunting, a cautionary tale of curiosity pushed to its extremes. As we move forward, the focus will shift to the controversies and opposition that arose as the surgeon's experiments became more widely known. The collision of ambition, ethics, and public scrutiny would shape not only his legacy but also the broader discourse on the limits of medical experimentation in an era defined by both innovation and moral uncertainty. As the surgeon's experiments gained attention, whispers of alarm began to circulate through Berlin's medical community. While his methods were celebrated in some circles as daring and innovative, others perceived them as reckless, morally dubious, and dangerously invasive. The same audacity that earned him admiration also drew suspicion, criticism, and, in some cases, outright hostility. The city that had nurtured his curiosity now became a crucible of ethical debate, as colleagues, authorities, and the public wrestled with the implications of his work. Among the medical community, the controversy was immediate and personal. Some doctors and researchers viewed the surgeon as a visionary, someone unafraid to explore the most profound mysteries of the human mind. They admired his precision, his combination of surgical skill with psychological insight, and his ability to generate results, however unpredictable, where others had failed. Yet this admiration was tempered by unease. Observers noted that his experiments frequently pushed patients to their limits, and sometimes beyond. There were accounts of individuals whose memories had been fragmented, whose identities were destabilized, and whose emotional states were profoundly altered. These consequences were difficult to reconcile with traditional medical ethics, which emphasized patient welfare and consent. The public, too, began to take notice, spurred by rumors, sensationalized reports, and a growing fascination with the human mind. Newspapers and magazines speculated on the nature of the surgeon's experiments, portraying him alternately as a genius and a madman. Stories circulated of patients emerging from the operating room changed, sometimes tragically, sometimes bizarrely, sparking fear and intrigue in equal measure. In a city still recovering from the trauma of war, these narratives struck a nerve. Berliners were fascinated by the possibilities of science, yet simultaneously unsettled by its apparent disregard for the most basic principles of human dignity. The ethical debate extended beyond anecdote and rumor. Formal inquiries, academic critiques, and letters between medical professionals reveal a sharp division of opinion. Some argued that his experiments were a necessary push into uncharted territory, a bold step that could ultimately expand humanity's understanding of memory, consciousness, and identity. Others condemned the work outright, suggesting that the surgeon's methods amounted to abuse, and that the pursuit of knowledge could never justify the suffering inflicted upon human subjects. These debates foreshadowed modern discussions of research ethics, particularly in the realm of human experimentation, and highlight the tension between scientific ambition and moral responsibility. Even within his own laboratory, opposition emerged. Assistants and junior doctors began to voice concern, questioning the intensity of the procedures and the psychological toll on patients. Some resigned in protest, unwilling to participate in work they considered morally indefensible. Others stayed, either out of loyalty, fear, or a belief that the potential knowledge justified the risks. This internal division mirrored the larger controversies in Berlin, revealing a moral fault line that extended from the surgeon's operating room to the halls of academia and the broader public sphere. Political and cultural factors also amplified scrutiny. Berlin in the early 1920s was a city of upheaval, where social norms were in flux and authority often contested. In this climate, the surgeon's experiments were interpreted through multiple lenses: scientific curiosity, artistic exploration, political risk, and social transgression. His work challenged not only the limits of neurology but also the ethical and cultural boundaries of the era. Critics argued that manipulating memory, a core aspect of personal identity, was inherently dangerous, potentially destabilizing not just individual lives but broader societal trust in medicine and science. Yet, despite mounting opposition, the surgeon continued. His ability to defend his work was remarkable. He framed his experiments as a quest for understanding, a means to unlock the hidden mechanisms of the human mind. Successes, however small or inconsistent, were presented as proof that he was on the verge of revolutionary discoveries. For some observers, this rationalization was convincing. For others, it was evidence of hubris, a dangerous belief that the pursuit of knowledge could justify any means, no matter the cost to human well-being. The tension between admiration and condemnation created a persistent sense of drama around the surgeon's work. Colleagues debated whether he was a pioneer or a pariah, a genius or a moral hazard. Patients' families wrestled with gratitude, fear, and grief, unsure whether the procedures had helped or harmed their loved ones. The public, fascinated by tales of memory manipulation, oscillated between fascination and horror. In this environment, controversy was inevitable, and the surgeon became a lightning rod for debates about ethics, ambition, and the limits of science. The debates of the era illuminate a central paradox. The same factors that made the surgeon's work groundbreaking also made it morally and socially perilous. His pursuit of memory's mysteries had the potential to expand human understanding, yet it also revealed the vulnerabilities of the human mind and the fragility of ethical oversight. Controversy, in this case, was inseparable from progress. The ethical, social, and scientific debates surrounding his experiments would echo far beyond the operating room, shaping perceptions of human experimentation for decades to come. As the story continues, we will explore the unintended consequences of the surgeon's work, examining how his interventions affected patients' identities, lives, and relationships in ways that could not have been predicted. These consequences reveal the human cost of curiosity and ambition, providing a stark reminder that the pursuit of knowledge can sometimes come at a price far higher than imagined. As the surgeon's experiments progressed, the theoretical promise of manipulating memory collided with a stark and often devastating reality. While he pursued precision and control, the human mind proved far more unpredictable than anticipated. Memory, it turned out, was not a simple mechanism to be accessed or rewritten at will. It was an intricate web of experiences, emotions, and identity. Every intervention carried the risk of altering not just recall, but personality, emotional stability, and the very sense of self. These unintended consequences became a defining feature of the surgeon's legacy, haunting both his patients and the broader scientific community. One of the most common effects observed was fragmentation of identity. Patients who had initially regained lost memories often reported a troubling sense of duality. They could recall long-forgotten events, yet the emotional resonance of those memories sometimes clashed with their current selves. A man might remember a traumatic childhood incident with vivid clarity, yet the emotions tied to that memory would overwhelm him in ways he could not reconcile with his present identity. A woman might recall moments of joy or love that no longer fit her current circumstances, leaving her disoriented and emotionally unstable. These experiences highlight a fundamental truth. Memory is not merely data, It is the framework through which we interpret, navigate, and construct our lives. In some cases, patients experienced partial memory loss instead of restoration. Attempts to revive a forgotten event occasionally resulted in the erasure of other, unrelated memories, leaving gaps in personal history that could never be recovered. These gaps were not always immediately apparent. They emerged gradually, altering behavior, decision-making, and relationships over time. Families reported changes in personality, unexpected emotional responses, and a growing sense that the person they knew had become fundamentally different. The surgeon's techniques, while intended to unlock and restore, could just as easily destroy, underscoring the fragility of the human mind and the unforeseen consequences of experimental intervention. Emotional instability was another pervasive consequence. Many patients, particularly those subjected to repeated procedures, displayed heightened anxiety, sudden mood swings, or depressive episodes. The intensity of recalling long-buried memories, especially traumatic ones, sometimes triggered psychological breakdowns. These effects were compounded by the lack of post-procedure support. The surgeon's focus was on experimentation and data collection rather than therapeutic recovery. The human cost, therefore, extended far beyond the operating room, influencing lives, families, and communities long after the experiments had ended. In some of the most extreme cases, patients experienced complete personality shifts. Memories, particularly those tied to formative experiences, shape moral judgment, emotional response, and interpersonal behavior. When memories were altered or erased, the fundamental architecture of identity could be destabilized. People who had once been kind and empathetic could become withdrawn or aggressive. Those who had exhibited caution or prudence might act recklessly or impulsively. These outcomes were unpredictable, often shocking to families and medical colleagues alike, and they revealed the profound responsibility inherent in tampering with memory. The societal implications of these consequences were equally significant. Berliners began to whisper of the surgeon's mind experiments, speculating on the potential dangers of such work if applied beyond the laboratory. Could memory manipulation be used for coercion, propaganda, or psychological control? The experiments, though initially private, became a subject of public intrigue and fear, prompting questions that extended beyond the scientific community. The unintended consequences highlighted the broader ethical stakes. Manipulating memory was not just a personal or medical concern, it had implications for society itself, challenging ideas of autonomy, identity, and moral agency. Even for the surgeon himself, these unintended consequences posed challenges. He was forced to confront the limits of his control, the unpredictability of human consciousness, and the occasional catastrophic failures of his interventions. While he often rationalized setbacks as part of the learning process, the reality was stark. Memory could not be tamed without risk, and the human mind did not always comply with theory or expectation. Success was fragile, temporary, and sometimes illusory, and failure could leave permanent, irreparable damage. Yet, paradoxically, these very consequences contributed to his notoriety and the fascination with his work. The dramatic effects, whether restoration or disruption, captured the imagination of contemporaries and cemented the surgeon's place in both scientific and cultural discourse. He became a figure emblematic of the dangerous intersection of curiosity and hubris, a man who reached into the very essence of human identity and emerged with knowledge that was as frightening as it was revolutionary. Through these unintended consequences, the story of the surgeon serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of human intervention, the complexity of memory, and the moral responsibilities inherent in scientific exploration. Each patient became a living testament to the delicate balance between innovation and harm, illustrating that the pursuit of knowledge, no matter how noble in intent, can yield outcomes that are both extraordinary and devastating. As we move to the next section, the narrative will examine the broader historical and scientific impact of his work, exploring how these experiments influenced the emerging field of neurology, shaped ethical debates, and left a legacy that continues to inform our understanding of memory and identity. The surgeon's work, controversial and morally complex, left a mark that extended far beyond the confines of his Berlin laboratory. While many of his experiments were ethically questionable, they forced the scientific community, and society at large, to confront fundamental questions about memory, identity, and the limits of human intervention. His legacy is a paradox, at once pioneering and cautionary, inspiring and unsettling, a reflection of both the potential and the peril of scientific ambition. One of the most significant aspects of his legacy lies in the field of neurology itself. His early interventions, though crude by modern standards, contributed to the evolving understanding of how memory is stored, retrieved, and influenced. By attempting to manipulate specific regions of the brain and observe the effects on recall and personality, he highlighted the intimate connection between neural structures and cognitive function. Later neurologists and psychologists built upon these observations, refining theories of memory, neuroplasticity, and brain behavior relationships. In this sense, the surgeon's work, despite its ethical failings, acted as a catalyst for scientific inquiry, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible and encouraging further research into the human mind. The influence of his work extended into psychology as well. By combining surgical intervention with chemical and psychological methods, he demonstrated that memory was not solely a biological phenomenon but an intricate interplay between brain, cognition, and emotion. These insights informed early explorations into trauma therapy, memory retrieval techniques, and the nascent field of cognitive neuroscience. While modern practitioners would condemn many of his methods as dangerous or unethical, his conceptual framework, recognizing memory as both malleable and central to identity, remains a foundational idea in contemporary studies of the mind. Culturally, the surgeon's experiments became part of a broader narrative about the human mind and the dangers of unchecked ambition. He entered the public imagination as both a scientific pioneer and a figure of moral ambiguity. Writers, journalists, and artists referenced his work, exploring themes of memory, identity, and ethical transgression in literature, theater, and visual art. In this way, his legacy was not confined to the laboratory. It permeated the collective consciousness, raising questions that remain relevant today. The fascination with memory manipulation, mind control, and the fragility of identity owes much to the stories and controversies surrounding his experiments. Ethically, the surgeon's work forced the medical and scientific communities to confront the consequences of unchecked experimentation. While formal regulations were limited during his time, the debate sparked by his methods contributed to the development of modern ethical standards in human research. Questions about consent, the limits of intervention, and the responsibility of scientists toward their subjects became central to emerging codes of conduct. In a sense, the very controversies that surrounded his experiments helped shape a framework designed to prevent similar ethical transgressions in the future. His work became a case study in both the possibilities and the dangers inherent in manipulating the human mind. The personal legacy of his patients also echoes through history. Many individuals whose memories were altered or fragmented lived with the consequences for the rest of their lives. Families, friends, and communities were forced to navigate the aftereffects of procedures that had reshaped identity in profound ways. These personal narratives, often tragic, underscore the human cost of scientific curiosity and serve as a reminder that progress is not merely a theoretical pursuit, it is measured in the lives it touches, sometimes irreversibly. Interestingly, the surgeon's legacy also reveals the dual nature of innovation: risk and reward, success and failure, discovery and destruction. His experiments demonstrated that human memory is a complex, dynamic system, capable of both resilience and vulnerability. They illuminated the power of scientific ambition while simultaneously exposing its limitations. In this sense, his work is emblematic of the tension inherent in all pioneering research. The drive to explore and expand knowledge must always be balanced against the potential for unintended consequences. Historians and scientists continue to debate the significance of his contributions. Some argue that his methods, though ethically flawed, provided invaluable insights into the brain and memory, insights that would later inform fields ranging from neurology to cognitive psychology. Others emphasize the moral costs, the psychological trauma inflicted on his subjects, and the lessons learned about the dangers of prioritizing knowledge over compassion. Both perspectives, however, acknowledge that his experiments were extraordinary in scope and ambition, a stark example of how one individual's vision can shape science, culture, and ethics in profound ways. The surgeon's work also resonates in contemporary discussions about memory and identity. Modern neuroscience explores techniques like deep brain stimulation, memory reconsolidation, and even the theoretical possibilities of memory editing. While today's methods are grounded in rigorous ethical oversight, the echoes of Berlin's early experiments are unmistakable. They remind us that curiosity can drive progress, but without careful consideration, it can also lead to consequences that are unpredictable and far-reaching. His experiments serve as both a foundation and a warning, a historical precedent that informs the way we think about memory, ethics, and the responsibility of science. Ultimately, the legacy of the surgeon is a story of duality. He was a pioneer and a provocateur, a genius and a cautionary figure. His experiments expanded the horizons of what was scientifically imaginable while exposing the fragility of human identity and the dangers of ethical neglect. His work challenges us to reflect on the boundaries of knowledge, the responsibilities of those who push them, and the human cost that sometimes accompanies discovery. In the shadows of his laboratory, we see both the brilliance and the peril of curiosity, a reminder that the quest to understand the mind is as profound as it is dangerous. As we prepare to conclude this narrative, the final section will explore the broader implications of his work, the lessons it offers for modern science, and the haunting questions it leaves for anyone who dares to probe the limits of human memory. The story of the surgeon is not merely a historical account. It is a meditation on ambition, ethics, and the mysteries of the mind that continue to captivate and caution us to this day. As the curtain falls on the story of the Berlin surgeon, the full weight of his work becomes apparent. What began as an audacious exploration of human memory evolved into a complex narrative of ambition, curiosity, and ethical transgression. Through his experiments, he exposed the fragility of the human mind, challenged conventional morality, and forced both the scientific community and society to confront uncomfortable questions about the limits of human intervention. The surgeon's story is more than a historical account. It is a meditation on the intersection of knowledge, power, and identity, a cautionary tale that resonates across time. One of the most striking lessons is the unpredictable nature of memory itself. The surgeon approached his subjects with a blend of precision and theoretical insight, seeking to isolate, manipulate, and even reconstruct memories. Yet time and again, the outcomes revealed that memory is not a mere repository of facts or experiences. It is fluid, dynamic, and deeply intertwined with emotion, personality, and perception. In some cases, his interventions produced remarkable recoveries. In others, they fragmented identity, erased critical experiences, or created psychological instability. These outcomes underscore a central truth. Memory is as much a reflection of who we are as it is a record of what we have experienced. To tamper with it is to tamper with the self. Equally compelling is the ethical dimension of his work. The surgeon operated at the edges of morality, in an era when oversight was minimal and standards were fluid. His experiments pushed boundaries that modern scientists would recognize as inviolable. Consent, psychological welfare, and long-term consequences were often secondary to the pursuit of knowledge. By examining his methods and their outcomes, we gain insight into the delicate balance between curiosity and responsibility. His legacy reminds us that scientific discovery, no matter how revolutionary, carries an inherent ethical weight. The pursuit of knowledge cannot exist in isolation from the consequences it produces. The human stories at the center of these experiments are perhaps the most poignant aspect of his legacy. Patients who regained lost memories sometimes found their lives enriched, but others were irreversibly altered. Families and communities were forced to navigate the consequences of interventions that reshaped identity and emotional stability. These narratives personalize the broader scientific and ethical questions, reminding us that behind every experiment are real people, each with hopes, fears, and vulnerabilities. The surgeon's story is a stark reminder that science is never abstract. It is lived, experienced, and sometimes endured at tremendous cost. From a historical perspective, the surgeon's work illuminates the ambitions and anxieties of early 20th century Berlin. The city was a hub of intellectual ferment, scientific experimentation, and cultural upheaval. Within this environment, radical ideas were both celebrated and scrutinized, pushing innovators to explore the unknown while exposing them to criticism and controversy. The surgeon thrived in this context, blending the era's intellectual curiosity with personal ambition and obsession. His experiments, while ethically fraught, were emblematic of a moment in history when boundaries were fluid, and the limits of human knowledge seemed tantalizingly close. The broader impact of his work can still be felt in modern science. Today, neurology, cognitive psychology, and memory research continue to grapple with questions first explored in rudimentary form by the surgeon. Techniques like memory reconsolidation, targeted stimulation, and cognitive therapy echo the principles he sought to test, albeit with far greater ethical oversight and scientific precision. His work serves as both a foundation and a warning, illustrating the promise of understanding the mind and the dangers of approaching it without caution. Contemporary scientists owe a debt to pioneers like him, but they also inherit the moral lessons embedded in his failures and controversies. Culturally, the story continues to captivate. Literature, film, and art frequently draw on themes of memory manipulation, identity, and the moral costs of scientific ambition, concepts popularized, in part, by the legacy of experiments like his. The fascination with altering memory, probing consciousness, and confronting ethical boundaries remains alive, suggesting that the questions he raised are timeless. His life and work challenge us to consider how far we are willing to go in pursuit of knowledge, and what we are willing to risk in the process. Ultimately, the surgeon's legacy is defined by duality. He was a man of brilliance and obsession, curiosity and moral ambiguity, innovation and peril. His experiments expanded scientific understanding while revealing the vulnerabilities of the human mind. They demonstrated both the possibilities and the dangers inherent in manipulating memory. Perhaps most importantly, they force us to reflect on our own boundaries, the limits of ambition, the responsibilities we bear to others, and the ethical frameworks necessary to guide the pursuit of knowledge. In reflecting on his story, we are left with enduring questions. What is the cost of understanding the human mind? How far can science go before it oversteps morality? Can memory, and by extension, identity, ever be altered without consequence? These questions are not confined to the past. They resonate today in debates about neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and the ethics of cognitive manipulation. The surgeon's work remains a touchstone for these discussions, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from the responsibility to wield it wisely. As we close this chapter, we are confronted with the enduring tension that defined the surgeon's life, the collision of genius and obsession, of discovery and ethical compromise. His experiments may have occurred in the shadows of early 20th century Berlin, but their implications echo through time, illuminating the fragile boundary between human curiosity and human cost. In the end, the story of the surgeon is not only a historical account but a profound reflection on the human condition, the quest to understand ourselves, the risks we take in that pursuit, and the indelible mark our actions leave on others. The tale of the Berlin surgeon, who dared to probe the deepest recesses of memory, serves as both a warning and a testament. It reminds us that knowledge is never neutral, that innovation carries both promise and peril, and that the human mind, in all its complexity, remains one of the most sacred frontiers in the pursuit of understanding. As we reflect on his life and work, we are compelled to balance admiration for ingenuity with recognition of ethical responsibility, understanding that in the delicate world of memory, every discovery carries consequences that reach far beyond the laboratory walls. Even after decades have passed since the surgeon's experiments in Berlin, his work continues to provoke thought, debate, and a sense of unease. The story does not conclude neatly. It lingers in the margins of history, in the shadowy intersections of science, ethics, and human identity. While the previous sections have explored his methods, his patience, and the consequences of his experiments, this final section seeks to draw together the lasting questions his life and work leave us with, a reflection on the pursuit of knowledge, the limits of ambition, and the enduring mysteries of memory. One of the most profound reflections concerns the nature of human memory itself. The surgeon sought to dissect, manipulate, and reconstruct it, yet the outcomes repeatedly demonstrated its complexity and fragility. Memory is not simply a series of snapshots or stored data. It is an active, dynamic process that shapes perception, informs emotion, and constructs the very sense of self. Attempts to control or alter it, even with the best intentions or most precise techniques, carry inherent risks. The lasting question remains: if memory can be manipulated, what becomes of the individual? Can identity survive such interference, or are we forever changed when our recollections are disrupted? This question extends beyond the scientific. It touches the ethical and philosophical dimensions of human existence. The surgeon's work forced contemporaries to confront the boundaries of acceptable behavior in science, and it continues to challenge modern audiences to consider where those boundaries lie today. How far should curiosity stretch? When does the pursuit of knowledge become exploitation? How do we weigh potential benefits against the human cost? These questions remain urgent as neuroscience, psychology, and technology advance at unprecedented rates. The Berlin experiments are not merely historical. They are a mirror reflecting ongoing dilemmas about human experimentation, informed consent, and the responsibility of those who wield knowledge. Another lasting consideration is the duality inherent in innovation. The surgeon's work produced both insight and suffering, breakthroughs and harm. Success and failure, hope and despair, often coexisted in the same laboratory, the same patient, and the same experiment. This duality highlights a universal tension in scientific progress. The same inquiry that can illuminate human potential can also expose vulnerability. His legacy reminds us that the line between genius and danger is thin, and that ethical vigilance is as critical to discovery as curiosity or technical skill. The consequences of crossing that line, as history shows, can echo across individual lives and the broader culture for generations. Cultural fascination with his work further underscores the complexity of his legacy. Stories of memory manipulation, identity alteration, and the human cost of scientific ambition have persisted in literature, film, and academic discourse. His experiments offer a narrative that is at once terrifying and compelling, a cautionary tale wrapped in the allure of the unknown. They challenge us to confront the darker aspects of human curiosity, the potential for hubris, and the fine balance between exploration and exploitation. In reflecting on his work, we see that science does not exist in a vacuum. It interacts with society, culture, and morality, creating ripples that can last long after the experiments themselves have ended. Finally, the surgeon's story invites us to think deeply about responsibility, both individual and collective. He operated in a time of limited oversight, yet even today, similar dilemmas arise when new technologies, therapies, or experimental interventions push the boundaries of what is possible. The lesson is clear: knowledge brings power, but power carries responsibility. The pursuit of discovery must always be tempered by reflection, empathy, and ethical consideration. The surgeon's experiments, both remarkable and troubling, provide a powerful illustration of what happens when this balance is disrupted. As we close this chapter, it is worth acknowledging the enduring human fascination with memory, identity, and the unknown. The Berlin experiments reveal not only the possibilities of scientific inquiry but also the inherent fragility of the human condition. They remind us that curiosity, while essential to progress, carries consequences that are often unpredictable and irreversible. The story of the surgeon, his patients, and the society that observed them is a cautionary tale, a testament to ambition, and a reflection on the ethical dimensions of science. In the end, we are left with questions rather than answers, with reflections rather than resolutions. What is the true cost of manipulating memory? How do we navigate the tension between curiosity and conscience? Can science ever fully grasp the depth of human identity without altering it in ways we cannot predict? These questions remain unresolved, echoing through history and reverberating into the present. They challenge us, haunt us, and inspire continued inquiry, ensuring that the story of the Berlin surgeon will remain both a historical curiosity and a moral touchstone for generations to come. The final thought is a warning and an invitation. As we pursue knowledge, explore the human mind, or push the frontiers of science, we must do so with humility, caution, and a profound awareness of the consequences. Memory is fragile, identity is sacred, and curiosity, while powerful, must never outpace conscience. In this delicate balance lies the true lesson of the surgeon's experiments, a lesson that resonates far beyond Berlin, far beyond the laboratory, and far beyond the years that separate us from his dark, audacious work.